This is the view of Mill Creek Canyon, the Grandeur Peak Trail. There's a lot of water coming down. And the question we're asking today is, are we out of the woods with our mega drought? We have had storm after storm after storm, and the grass is green everywhere. The canyon runoff water is abundant. Everything is looking awesome in the mountains. But are we out of the woods? So that's what we're going into in this episode of the Utah Story Show. Thanks for joining me. My name is Rich Markosian. So we're examining the mega drought, both the picture here along the Wasatch Front, as well as the greater picture statewide and beyond our state in looking at the entire Great Basin region. Just asking the question, how are we doing with this mega drought? Okay, so first of all, I want to show you our reservoir levels. So I'm going to show you a graph here that shows and indicates where we are with reservoirs. Okay, so let's take a look starting with the reservoirs most people know about. This is Current Creek Reservoir. It's kind of all over the place, but if you look at the green graph, it is 102% of normal right now, or no, 98% of normal. Deer Creek Reservoir, right now, we are looking at 86% of normal. Up further north, Porcupine Reservoir, we're at 82%. Woodruff Creek, 99.5%. And Causey Reservoir, 100% of normal. Then I think we're looking at East Canyon, we're at 73%. The one I'm trying to find is Pineview Reservoir. There we are, 57% of normal. So that is really the most telling number because Pineview is a water resource we all use. The farmers that I know along Fruit Highway, where we get all of our peaches, where we get our plums, our raspberries, our boysenberries, our blackberries, they are the ones reliant on Pineview Reservoir. And Pineview, obviously, is probably the number one lake in the Wasatch Front region for boating. Maybe Jordanelle comes in a close second. But as you can see, it's not as good as you might suspect. Rockport's at 84%. You go further south. And the further south you go, the more bleak the picture becomes. Cleveland Lake, I'm not even sure where that is. Just 4% of normal. It's almost completely dried out. Miller Flat Reservoir, 40% of normal. But what I wanted to point out is the big problem is, first of all, our Great Salt Lake. Examine how receded the lake still is. So what happened, if you know about the history of flooding and what's happening along the Wasatch Front concerning the Great Salt Lake, is we were hitting high water marks back in the early 90s. We had about 6 or 7 years of really abundant snowfall from about 80 through 92. That's more like 10 years. But we had a problem with too much water. And so they built these giant pumps to pump water out of the lake because they were afraid that there would be no way to access the islands anymore if they didn't pump the water. Those pumps haven't been used since 1992. And since then, we've had a constant receding of the lake, and the lake has just gone drier and drier and drier, receded further and further out. And now the lake, the Great Salt Lake Yacht Club, it's no longer really viable to launch sailboats on the Great Salt Lake. Why is this such a big deal? It's because if you love skiing powder and you love mountain snow, if we don't have water in the Great Salt Lake, we don't get those giant, amazing lake effect storms. The Great Salt Lake acts like a giant sink. And so when clouds move over, low pressure systems, they actually draw tons of water directly out of the lake, and they feed clouds water. And that's thanks to the massive, abundant land mass that is the lake. And as that land mass, the lake, recedes more and more and more, you're not going to see those huge powder days anymore. And so what needs to happen along the Wasatch Front is we need to practice water conservation for the first time ever, really. I mean, we really have not done that ever in my lifetime. We have all this green grass everywhere. We have all these yards with grass and beautiful plants everywhere. We live in a desert. We can't do that. We need to feed our reservoirs. We need to feed our lakes and rivers and streams. And the only way to do that is to not be using so much water. I feel like this, unfortunately, is a polarized issue. I think that a lot of people think that they have this right to the water. And I think, we actually are at water shares at my house. We bought the house with water shares. But we have this lawn that's so massive that requires so much water, it's ridiculous. And so we're slowly trying to take out the lawn in our house. I'll probably show you some updates of our garden area and how we're doing that. But it's something everybody needs to do. We need to xeriscape more. We need to find ways to use more drip irrigation. That has to happen so our Great Salt Lake is preserved. But the bigger picture is the Colorado River. What's happening with that is absolutely devastating right now. In eastern Utah, we've really not gotten the water we need. Fortunately, in Flaming Gorge Reservoir, they were getting a lot of water. And if you look back here in June of last year, they were at 83% of where they needed to be. But look what's happened to Flaming Gorge Reservoir. It dropped in the fall months down to 77%, went all the way down, stayed at 77%, saw some more runoff, 78%, but now it's back down to 77% of normal. What's going on is Flaming Gorge Reservoir is on the Green River. The Green River is the major tributary of the Colorado River, and the Colorado River, of course, flows into Lake Powell and then followed by Lake Mead. Lake Powell is at historic lows. It's about 23% of normal. I'm going to click on Lake Powell right now. 23.8% of capacity. It's almost to the point where they cannot generate hydroelectric power anymore at Glen Canyon Reservoir. It is just becoming very, very difficult to launch boats. I think that Height Marina is still open. Bullfrog, I'm not so sure. But the problem is the populations downstream of us in the Great Basin states, Arizona, Nevada, and California, which actually rely on the Colorado River far more than we do, they are suffering big time. There's farmers in Arizona who are told they are not getting water this summer, whose farms are basically becoming inoperable. They're suffering big time because it's now extreme drought, and they're just having to now prioritize who gets water. What's going to happen to the water? Who gets it? And of course, they're going to keep feeding the water to the population centers. And I did a big story on this last fall, and this story's actually done quite well recently. The question of the story is, should we drain the Glen Canyon Dam? Should we just get rid of it? Because it's probably not going to be operable in the next few years if this drought continues. And it was probably not a good idea in the first place. But the problem is the whole state of Arizona is completely dependent upon the Colorado River for its existence, as is Las Vegas and Henderson, Nevada, these major population centers. There's 40 million people who rely on that water in order to live. And how does this relate to you in Utah? Well, we have something called the Central Utah Water Project, and it's now being proposed that Washington County wants to drill a pipeline from Lake Powell to St. George to feed the population center there because we're entitled to more water shares than what we're getting. The problem is we take all the water shares were way over allocated when they were allocated back in the, I believe, early 60s when the Bureau of Reclamation set those water standards in place. And so we can take that water, I guess, and face a whole bunch of lawsuits, but it's kind of ridiculous because the populations have already been over allocated. There's not enough water to sustain the populations of Las Vegas, of Henderson, Los Angeles County, Phoenix, Tucson. So it's a very dire situation for those people who are the south of us. And for us, I think it's dire as well if we don't continue to respect the water levels of the Great Salt Lake. So the major problem is we here along the Wasatch Front could ignore the whole water situation that our fellow Great Basin state neighbors are suffering, or we could acknowledge that we do have a problem here, a major problem with the Great Salt Lake. We have a major problem with the Colorado River Basin. It all affects us, and it all will come back to bite us if we don't take it seriously. And so now I want to show you a report from the New Yorker magazine. This is called Where the River Runs Dry. It's the Colorado and America's Water Crisis. Now, this was written way back in 2015, but this just goes to show you how long this problem has existed, how big of a problem it is, and what neighboring states have done to combat it. Because Nevada and Arizona, like I said, they suffer way more than we do because they're completely dependent upon the rivers of the Colorado River. So this picture you see here, the caption reads, Lake Mead, which forms the border between Nevada and Arizona, 30 miles from Las Vegas. The lake is fed by the Colorado. It was last full in 1998. Since then, its volume has fallen by some 60%, and the water level has dropped more than 100 feet. That was in 2015. It's insanely low now. It's like Lake Powell. It's around 23%. And I'm not going to read this entire story, but I want to point out that what is happening is scary. I mean, especially if you're in Salt Lake City. But I want to read this part. This points out the severity of the problem in the entire Great Basin area. It's nearly 1,000 miles shorter than the Mississippi and only a fraction as wide, but it's a crucial resource for a surprisingly large percent of the United States. A congressman in 1928 called it intrinsically the most valuable stream in the world, and its tributaries flow through alongside 7 western states: Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, California, before crossing into Mexico near Yuma, Arizona. It supplies water to approximately 36 million people, including residents of not just Boulder and Denver, but also Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, San Diego, Los Angeles, several of which are hundreds of miles from its banks. It irrigates close to 6 million acres of farmland. It powers hydroelectric power at Hoover and Glen Canyon Dam. The point is that the Colorado River is so crucial, and we can control its flow to the greatest extent here in Utah because of Flaming Gorge. Flaming Gorge was the best reservoir in the best shape as of last year at this time. Like I pointed out, we were about 85% of full in Flaming Gorge, and the reason why they're running it is to keep those places viable. And so it really all does depend on us. It's something we need to do something about. And I want to recommend a book to you that I read last summer. It's really an excellent book. It's called A River No More. It's a little bit hard to get because it's out of print. It's by Philip L. Fradkin. He follows the headwaters of the Colorado all the way down to the Gulf of California where it ends up. And he shows exactly how this river has become so instrumental to so many population centers, and how desalination plants have been installed to make the water drinkable along the Colorado River. They completely rely on desalination plants in Los Angeles. So check that out. We're going to be covering the drought, the mega drought, from the farmer's perspective. Next month, we're interviewing farmers. We're talking to the farmers who rely mostly on the waters in the Wasatch Front area. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe to this channel if you like this content. Give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to support Utah Stories and have the voice of local Utah delivered right to your door, you can do so by going to visit utahstories.com. Click on the subscribe button, and fill out this information. And for just $2 a month, you can have the issue of Utah Stories delivered right to your door every single month. All right, with that, thank you so much for watching.